Hello, this is going to be a response to the channel Fruit of Atheism. You, sir, have gotten my attention, and as of now, a subscriber. Good job. Alright, so he posted a video of me and D.P.R. Jones in a discussion about Craig's epistemology, about it being Kantian in nature, as I said. Now, of course, I am going to make some confessions here. I did make some mistakes, and I'll go for it. First, I should not have said Kantian. I should have more or less said Neo-Kantian. And there is a bit of a difference here. Neo-Kantian, of course, in this scenario, refers to Stuart Hackett and his personal philosophy on epistemology. Now, Hackett's rational empiricism, as he calls it in his book, The Resurrection of Theism, heavily prompts Craig in his defense of the first premise of the Kalam cosmological argument, which is what me and D.P.R. Jones were discussing. D.P.R. Jones said that the argument wasn't even deductive, it was inductive, because we inductively know the notion that whatever begins to exist has a cause because of induction. That's what we see here. And I said, no, that's actually not the case with Craig. He doesn't make it, he doesn't put it in terms of induction. And here is the source I'm going to read to show that one off. Sorry, I have tons of tabs that are up right now, so it's going to take me a while to shift through them all. This one I'm going to post in the description because it has a link that I can get to. The second line of support that Craig gives for his premise, everything that begins to exist has a cause, is the argument from the a priori category of causality. Craig develops this argument based on the work of Stuart Hackett, who formulates a Neo-Kantian epistemology and defends the premise based on the operation of a mental a priori category of causality, which the mind brings to experience. Previously, Kant had argued that knowledge is a synthesis of two factors, the first being the sense data of experience, and the second being the a priori categorical structure of the mind. Kant saw these categories as forms the mind must possess in order to make logical judgments. Without these categories, any intelligible experience would be impossible. Therefore, Kant attempted to compile these categories, one being the judgment type, which was his category of causality. Since causality is a valid derived category, and further, since Kant provided that derived category reveals the real structure of both thought and the world, it follows that his first premise must be an a priori proposition based on the fact that the principle is both a universal and a necessary condition. So that's one of the sources I'm going to link to. And the other is another paper which states along similar lines. The second line of argument Craig develops from the work of Stuart Hackett. Briefly, Hackett defends a Neo-Kantian epistemology within which, quote, the categories have application beyond the realm of sense data, end quote, and do, in fact, furnish knowledge of things in themselves. In sum, the position that Craig adopts from Hackett is one where the categories are both forms of thought and forms of things. Thought and reality are structured homogeneously. Craig then argues that since causality is a validly derived category, and since validly derived categories reveal the real structure of both thought and the world, it allows for the causal principle. Whatever comes to be has a cause of its coming to be. Must be a synthetic a priori proposition. Since the principle is both universal and a necessary condition of thought, it is a priori, and since the principle is not analytic, as Hume showed, it must be synthetic. And with the remark that Hackett has provided an attractive defense of the reality of causation that merits further research, Craig brings his discussion of premise 1 to a close. So that's the end of that one. Now, the first one is a master's thesis directed for a class, and it's aptly sourced. The person actually does link to where you could find it, the point in Craig's work on the Kalam cosmological argument. And the second one is also properly sourced as well. Same pages, two different sources. The second one is, let's see, is a PhD thesis. by another person. It's a dissertation submitted to the School of Faculty of Philosophy of the Catholic University of America in partial fulfillment of the requirements for the degree of Doctor of Philosophy. And, yeah, that one I cannot link to because it's done through my school's library. It's by Mark R. Nowacki. Although I will use print screen to share this specific one that I found, and, of course, the first title. So, with that, that's where I was kind of coming from with this. Not necessarily that Craig himself was a Kantian in all respects. I mean, certainly he wouldn't be metaphysically a Kantian. In terms of ethics, he's definitely not Kantian in that one as well. Now, what's fairly interesting is you bring up the cosmological argument and the fact that Kant was arguing against it, which is correct. Kant did definitely argue against a version of the cosmological argument. I believe it was St. Thomas Aquinas' version of the cosmological argument. And for more on that, I'm going to link you guys to an awesome channel, carneades.org. It's fantastic. There's just a lot to be had from that. He's a pure skeptic who attacks any form of knowledge, which is pretty interesting. But, as we continue this, St. Thomas's cosmological argument didn't necessarily require a beginning. So that was based on kind of a necessary entity of some kind, which Kant objected to in his critique of pure reason. Kant thought necessary beings are just an unthinkable concept. You need something like an ontological argument. And on that ground, he rejected it. However, as a reasonable faith chapter details, which is pretty interesting. Let's see here. I'm going to link you guys to this one. The second reason that Kant provides for the dependency of the cosmological argument on the ontological argument is the cosmological argument relies on the ontological argument to associate the necessary being with God, as I was just saying. Kant claims that the ontological argument shows that God is a necessary being and therefore exists. The cosmological argument shows that a necessary being exists, and then relies on the ontological argument to infer the necessary being is God. However, this is not necessarily so. William Lane Craig's Kalam cosmological argument does not go this route. We will discuss it later. And of course, they discuss the argument. Everything which begins to exist has a cause, the universe began to exist, and therefore the universe has a cause. It doesn't say anything about this cause being a necessary being, just a timeless one. At least at the very conception of the universe. As Craig kind of points out, but that's debatable. In terms of whether or not you'd have to agree with it that much. But essentially, Craig's cosmological argument, the Kalam, is far different than the cosmological argument that Kant tackles. I don't know what Kant's thing about the Kalam would be. That's a little bit beyond my knowledge. So, with that out of the way, let's think. What else was kind of pointed out to in that video? I should also add that my point on the Kalam cosmological argument and D.P.R. Jones' objection actually comes from and was a response in similarity to the Messianic Drew, who I'm also going to link to, who tackles what he calls the empiricistic objection to the Kalam cosmological argument, which, yes, I will link to again, and that one he calls Craig and Neo-Kantian. So maybe that term isn't properly applied to Craig, I'll maybe concede that much, but I don't think it's off to say that Craig's defense of the first premise was inspired under Neo-Kantian influences, as these two theses that I'm citing illustrate, both citing his original work. So, and the last thing. Fruit of Atheism, you actually said something I find fairly interesting. The first piece originally appeared at the, I'm not even going to pronounce the name of that one, I'm going to screw it up, article. Kant attempts to publish the second piece in the same journal, met with opposition from the king's censor. Kant then arranged to have all 4 pieces published as a book, routing it through the philosophy department at the University of Jena. To avoid the need for theological censorship, Kant was reprimanded for this action of insubordination when he nevertheless published his second edition in 1794. The censor was so irate that he arranged for a royal order that required Kant to never publish or even speak publicly about religion. Now, what's really interesting about this is Craig has actually defended a biblical scholar by the name of Mike Lichona, who was fired from his position for offering an alternative explanation in the book of Matthew, the part where people come from, where the dead rise from the grave in Jerusalem. He argues it's a piece of apocalyptic motif, and for that he was fired, and William Lane Craig actually stood up in his defense at that. So while he wouldn't have been censored himself, he has involved himself in censorship debate, defending those who have been censored. Well, at least one person who has been censored. Not to say that he would have done this for anyone. Again, I don't know his actions in other regards, but there was at least one case we can see of William Lane Craig actually coming to someone's defense at censorship. And, of course, I'll link to that story as well. Alright, so in any case, I'm glad we could clear that up. I look forward to any more of your material that your channel seems to offer. Cool. See ya.